You ever meet someone who just needs to feel in charge? Like their whole personality is built around enforcing rules that nobody asked for? Yeah, that's Karen. But before we get to her, and the moment I landed a literal helicopter in my suburban driveway, let me give you a bit of background. I'm a pretty laid-back guy. Early 40s, retired from the Air Force after 20 years as a helicopter pilot. These days, I do freelance flight instruction and occasionally help with emergency airlifts. Nothing too flashy. I like peace and quiet, grilling on weekends, and keeping my tools organized. My pride and joy, my Jeep Wrangler. Big tires, matte black, built like a tank and runs smoother than melted butter. That Jeep and I have been through everything. Mud, snow, sandstorms. It's not just a car, it's a part of who I am. So when I moved into this new suburban neighborhood, nice place, lots of trees, cul-de-sacs, kids riding scooters, I thought I'd finally found my little slice of peace. The homes looked great. Neighbors waved. The HOA, well, I figured how bad could it be? Spoiler, very bad. Karen, HOA president, self-appointed neighborhood sheriff, and full-time clipboard warrior, took one look at my Jeep and decided it wasn't aesthetic. According to her, I was lowering the property value by parking in my own driveway. I tried being nice, I tried reasoning, but Karen wouldn't budge, so I decided if my Jeep was too much for her precious HOA, maybe she needed something a little bigger to complain about. Let's just say she never saw the helicopter coming. Buckle up, this gets fun. The neighborhood looked perfect. At first, it was the kind of place you see in real estate commercials. Pristine sidewalks, manicured hedges trimmed like military cuts, American flags on every porch, and flower beds so symmetrical they looked AI-generated. Houses were a cookie-cutter mix of rustic modern and colonial chic, each one painted in carefully HOA-approved tones: muted sage, soft cream, dusty gray. God forbid someone wanted red shutters. That would apparently destroy the ecosystem. The first week I moved in, I actually thought it was kind of nice. Peaceful, quiet. Every morning, sprinklers clicked on in unison like they were choreographed. Stay-at-home moms jogged with matching strollers. Even the dogs seemed Stepford-level obedient. Then I met Karen. You ever see someone who lives to be in charge? That's Karen, our HOA president, early 50s, platinum blonde hair locked in a helmet. Hairspray. Lips always pursed like she smelled something sour. She never went anywhere without her clipboard. A pen she clicked like a metronome of judgment, and a sour expression like she was permanently offended by the mere existence of other people. Karen wasn't just involved in the HOA. She was the rules were her religion, violations were her commandments, and every house in the neighborhood was her personal kingdom. She fined one neighbor $50 for using sunflower yellow flower pots instead of the approved terracotta earth tone. Another family got a warning because their wind chimes were audibly disruptive to the community peace. Lawn height, measured, garbage cans must be wheeled in within exactly 22 minutes of pickup. Miss it, and you'd get a warning taped to your door like a scarlet letter. So naturally, when I pulled my big, beautiful, blacked-out Jeep into my driveway, it was like waving a red flag in front of a very territorial bull. At first, I didn't even realize I was on her radar. I'd park like any normal person, wash it on weekends, and mind my own business. But then I noticed her lingering. She'd walk her dog past my house 3 times in one morning. She'd stare from across the street like my Jeep personally. Salted her. Then came the first warning, a politely hostile note taped to my mailbox. Dear homeowner, your vehicle does not conform to the aesthetic expectations of our community. Please consider parking it inside your garage or obtaining a more appropriate vehicle. Appropriate? What was I supposed to do? Buy a Prius and paint it beige? I ignored it. I figured it was a one-off. But the notes kept coming. Then actual citations. $25 here, $50 there. I started getting official HOA notices in the mail with passive-aggressive phrases like non-compliance, continued disruption, and my favorite, visual inconsistency. One day I caught her outside and decided to take the diplomatic route. "Hey Karen," I said with a smile that cost me actual effort. "What's the real issue with my Jeep? It's parked in my own driveway. It's clean, legal, not leaking oil on the sidewalk. She looked me over like I'd just tracked mud into her living room. It doesn't fit the visual harmony of the community, she said, crisp and robotic. This is a refined neighborhood, not a military compound. I laughed, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. She gave me a tight-lipped smile and walked away. That's when I realized this wasn't about rules. It was about control. Karen didn't like my Jeep because it didn't fit her vision. And people like her, they don't stop until you either give in or go bigger. Well, I don't back down. And I sure as hell don't get bullied out of my own driveway. I wish I could tell you Karen got bored and moved on to obsess over someone else's flower pots. But no, she doubled down, then tripled down. This woman had apparently decided that my Jeep was her personal war. It started with more fines. Almost weekly, I'd get envelopes from the HOA stuffed with notices, each more ridiculous than the last. One said my Jeep's appearance created a visual disruption to the clean lines of the community. Another claimed it was attracting unwanted attention from outside visitors. What the hell does that even mean? Then came the anonymous letters, though let's be honest, they were about as anonymous as a signed confession. The handwriting matched the passive-aggressive notes she used to tape to other people's trash cans, and the tone, pure Karen. This is a family neighborhood. Your aggressive vehicle sets a poor example. Consider your neighbors. Some of us have children. One letter even called me uncivilized because I drive a Jeep, not because I left trash out, played loud music, or parked on the lawn. Just because my ride didn't look like it belonged in a car commercial for accountants. It got worse. At the next HOA meeting, where I usually stayed silent and watched the circus, Karen made a scene. She pointed me out in front of everyone and started ranting about how my military vehicle was intimidating the neighborhood, scaring kids, and, I quote, undermining community values. Someone actually laughed. I cracked a smile. Karen didn't. You're not taking this seriously, she snapped. But others are uncomfortable. They don't want their children walking past that thing, my Jeep. I tried to explain calmly that it was legally registered, met all state and local codes, and was parked well within the confines of my own driveway. Karen didn't care. A week later, I found out why. I read the minutes from a recent HOA meeting, one I hadn't been invited to, and there it was. Karen had pushed through a special amendment to the HOA bylaws banning military-style or oversized vehicles from being parked in driveways. Effective immediately. What's a military-style vehicle? Apparently anything Karen doesn't like. She slipped it in during an unscheduled meeting and claimed she had enough proxy votes to pass it. Real slick. Now the fines were daily. $100 a day for non-compliance. My appeals were denied without discussion. I sent emails. I asked for a hearing. Karen responded with a one-line reply. You should have read the bylaws more carefully. I was livid. But I still hadn't snapped. Not yet. That came the day I walked outside, coffee in hand, ready to head out, and my Jeep was gone. At first, I thought it was stolen. I spun around in circles, heart hammering, calling the police. But then I saw it, Karen standing at her window, arms folded, sipping her tea with that smug little smile plastered across her face. I called the HOA. Per the updated vehicle policy, the voicemail chirped. Non-compliant vehicles may be subject to removal. At the homeowner's expense. She had it towed, without warning. From my own damn driveway, that was it. That was the moment I snapped. I stood there on the lawn, staring at that empty slab of concrete, and I made myself a promise. If Karen wanted to play games, she was about to lose. Badly. She thought my Jeep was too much. Just wait till she saw what I could really park in my driveway. Because I wasn't just a Jeep guy. I was a pilot, and I had something a little bigger, something with rotor blades. The second I saw that empty space where my Jeep used to be, a switch flipped in my brain. I wasn't angry. I was laser-focused. Karen wanted a war. Fine, I've seen worse. Hell, I've flown helicopters into combat zones. A turf battle with a suburban dictator? That's just Tuesday. Let me back up a second. I'm not just a guy who happens to drive a Jeep and drink black coffee like it's a religion. Before I settled into this quiet life, I spent over 2 decades in the military, most of it as a search and rescue pilot. I flew Black Hawks in deserts, mountains, and disaster zones. I've landed on cliff edges, rooftops, and once, a moving barge. Flying's in my blood. When I retired, I couldn't quite let go of the sky. So I bought myself a bird. Not a black hawk, of course. I'm not trying to invade the HOA. But a sleek civilian-registered Robinson R44. 4-seater, charcoal gray, powerful but quiet. I keep it hangared at a small private airfield about 30 minutes away. I use it occasionally, for freelance work or just to clear my head. Flying has always been my peace. That day, though, it became my weapon. I pulled up the HOA bylaws, digitally this time, because I wasn't going to trust whatever version Karen was passing around. I scrolled through every section: vehicle regulations, driveway usage, noise restrictions, and bingo, not one word about aircraft, nothing about helicopters. No mention of airspace, no clause about vertical landings. Karen had written her little rule book for people with RVs and boats. She never thought anyone would have access to something with rotor blades. I cracked my knuckles and started planning. First step: flight clearance. Even though I could technically land on private property, I wasn't taking any chances. I contacted the local FAA field office and walked them through the plan. My driveway had the clearance. There were no power lines nearby, and I wasn't flying over any restricted zones. They gave me the thumbs up, as long as I kept it within daylight hours and followed all procedures. Next, I reached out to a buddy of mine, a retired aviation lawyer, just to double-check the legality. He laughed for a full minute when I told him the story. "Let me get this straight," he said between chuckles. "Your HOA towed your Jeep, so you're going to land a helicopter in your driveway? That's the idea." He cleared his throat. "Well, it's technically legal. They'd need an entirely separate set of zoning codes or aviation clauses to stop you. As long as the FAA is cool with it, and you're not causing damage or endangerment, you're good. Even if it's just to prove a point," he grinned, "especially if it's to prove a point." With the legal and aviation side locked down, I focused on logistics. I prepped the R44 for the short flight. I ran safety checks. I scoped out my landing zone, measured the space, marked the safest angles, even warned my closest neighbor who thought the whole idea was awesome. He offered to bring popcorn. Then I set the date, Saturday morning. Why Saturday? Because that's when Karen hosted the monthly HOA meetings. Always the first Saturday at 10 a.m. sharp. She'd set up folding chairs on her lawn, pass out little paper agendas, and read through neighborhood updates like she was the damn president. I wanted her entire audience to be there. I wanted witnesses. So, I waited, patient, focused. The Jeep was still in impound. Karen made sure of that. But I wasn't angry anymore. I was calm, calculated, ready to turn her little world of micromanaged chaos upside down. And that Saturday morning, I planned to come in hot, literally, because if Karen thought a Jeep was unsightly, she was about to find out what a real parking problem looked like. Saturday morning arrived like something out of a Norman Rockwell painting. Clear blue skies, birds chirping, a light breeze rustling through perfectly trimmed hedges. It was HOA meeting day in suburbia, and like clockwork, Karen was already in full dictator mode. I watched from a distance, circling above in my R44 chopper, eyes hidden behind aviators, heart steady, mouth curled into a slight grin. Below, the scene played out exactly as I imagined. Karen had transformed her front lawn into a makeshift town hall again. Rows of neatly placed folding chairs, a card table up front with color-coded pamphlets, and that ridiculous oversized clipboard of hers in hand like it was a royal decree. About 20 neighbors were seated, sipping bad coffee out of styrofoam cups and pretending to care, while Karen droned on about neighborhood integrity and aesthetic consistency. She was in her element, commanding, self-righteous. Absolutely. oblivious to what was coming. Up in the sky, I turned into the wind, radioed my final approach, and dropped altitude. Whoop, 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 whoop. The blades cut through the air with a deep rhythmic growl. I knew the sound would carry for blocks. I wanted it to. Wanted that buildup, that tension. The cinematic rise before the big drop. Down below, kids were the first to hear it. I could see them pointing, tugging on their parents' sleeves, their little heads craning upward as I crested the trees and hovered into view like something out of an action movie. Karen stopped mid-sentence, her words cut off by the rising roar. She looked up, squinting, one hand shielding her face from the sun, the other still clutching her clipboard like it would protect her from the incoming thunder. Then, she saw me, and her face, oh man, I wish I had it on camera. Mouth open, eyes wide, total disbelief melting into rage. I started my descent. Neighbors stood up now, staring, murmuring to each other in surprise and awe. Some looked concerned. Others looked impressed. And, the kids? They were flat out cheering. As I lined up with my driveway, I slowed the bird to a gentle hover over my cul-de-sac. Leaves flew, loose grass scattered. One of Karen's perfectly positioned lawn signs went airborne and cartwheeled down the street. I spotted her trying to hold her hair in place as the downwash blew her backwards like she was in a wind tunnel. I gently lowered the skids to the concrete. Touchdown. The rotors kept spinning as I powered down. Dust swirled, her meeting papers tumbled across her lawn like tumbleweeds, and one of her flower pots tipped over with a crash that made me chuckle. Then, silence. The blades wound down to a slow churn. I pushed open the cockpit door and stepped out into the chaos I had just created. Wearing dark aviators, black boots, and a plain t-shirt, I looked every bit the retired pilot with zero tolerance. For HOA tyranny, I didn't rush, I didn't smile. I simply nodded once to the stunned audience like I'd just arrived at a cookout. A man across the street started clapping. "That's how you park," he shouted. A woman near Karen's chair stifled a laugh. Karen, meanwhile, looked like she had just witnessed a crime. She stormed across the lawn, hair disheveled, arms flailing. "What is the meaning of this?" I removed my headset, tucked it under one arm, and turned to face her with the calmness of a monk. "Good morning," I said, cool as a cucumber. Didn't want to be late for the meeting. "This is outrageous. This is not an airfield. You can't just land a helicopter in a residential neighborhood." "Actually," I said, pulling a folded piece of paper from my pocket, "I can. FAA approved. Private property. Safe approach, no ordinance violations." I handed her the document. She didn't take it, just stared at it like it might explode in her hands. "You're endangering lives. This is a peaceful community." Looked around at the kids cheering and filming with their phones, the neighbors smiling, the guy still clapping in slow motion like he was witnessing a legend unfold. "Seems peaceful to me," I said, "just spicing it up a little." Karen's mouth opened and closed again, her face redder than a stop sign. "You think this is funny?" I shrugged. "Not as funny as towing someone's Jeep because it doesn't match the aesthetic." "That was pretty rich. You can't live like this. You can't do this." I leaned in slightly. "Karen, you rewrote the bylaws to ban my Jeep, but you forgot to ban helicopters. That one's on you." Around us, murmurs turned into chuckles. More people were pulling out phones. Someone whispered, "He's a legend." Karen finally grabbed the paper from my hand, glaring at it like she could melt it with pure hatred. "I will report this. I will fix this." I smiled and slid my aviators back on. "You go ahead and try." And with that, I turned on my heel and strolled up the driveway, past my grounded chopper, into my house, cool, composed, and victorious. Karen stood alone in the middle of her disheveled lawn, papers scattered, neighbors distracted, authority crumbling around her. I hadn't just parked a helicopter. I'd landed a message: "Mess with a Jeep owner, and you get the blades." Karen stomped across the street like a bull charging a matador, fists clenched, face redder than a fire truck on the 4th of July. "You move that thing now," she shrieked, pointing at the helicopter like it had personally insulted her grandmother. I was standing beside it, cool as ever, sipping a bottle of water like I hadn't just turned her HOA meeting into a local air show. Good morning, Karen, I said deadpan. Lovely day for flying. She was shaking with rage. You can't just land a machine in a neighborhood. This is not an airstrip. This is Maplewood Heights. I pulled the FAA clearance from my back pocket with the kind of calm that drives people like her insane. Actually, I can. Registered. Aircraft. Approved flight plan. Safe approach and landing. No ordinances broken. And, I added, tapping the second page, nothing in your HOA bylaws mentions aircraft. She snatched the papers like she was going to tear them up, then paused, probably realizing ripping them wouldn't make the helicopter disappear. Her voice jumped an octave. I'm calling the police. You can't get away with this. This is illegal, I smiled. By all means, call them. She did, right there, hands trembling, voice high-pitched as she screamed about a lunatic with a military aircraft terrorizing the neighborhood. I think she even used the word air raid. It was a beautiful bit of unintentional comedy. About 10 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up. The officers stepped out and looked around, clearly expecting something more serious. Then they saw the helicopter, parked neatly in my driveway like it belonged in a James Bond movie. I walked over, waved, and greeted them with the same calm tone. Morning, officers, can I help you? Karen ran over, nearly tripping on her own outrage. That's the man. He landed a helicopter in our neighborhood. He's unhinged. He's breaking laws. This is a residential area. The taller of the 2 officers looked at me. You have permits for that? I handed them the FAA documents and pointed out the aircraft registration. Filed everything properly. Safe landing, private property. Confirmed with my attorney, too. They took a minute to read over the paperwork, murmuring to each other. One of them even whistled. That's a nice bird. Robinson? R-44, I said with a nod. Man, I've always wanted to fly one of these, the other officer said, smiling. Karen's jaw practically hit the sidewalk. Are you serious? He's violating everything. The officers turned back to her, professional but firm. Ma'am, everything checks out. He hasn't broken any laws. This is technically within his rights. Karen let out a strangled squeak. He's ruining the neighborhood. From across the street, someone laughed. A group of teens was recording. On their phones, one of them said, Karen's going viral again. The cops gave me a little nod and left, shaking their heads in disbelief. Karen just stood there, breathing heavily, surrounded by swirling papers and scattered pride, her little empire crumbling. And me? I just leaned back against my chopper and smiled. Another win for the Jeep guy. After the dust settled, literally and figuratively, Karen did exactly what I expected. She tried to retaliate. By Monday morning, a new draft amendment had appeared. In the HOA newsletter titled, Proposal 14C, Prohibition of Aerial Vehicle Landings in Residential Zones. It was a desperate Hail Mary, filled with bold, underlined words like danger, safety, and community image. She even tried to sneak in a line about military-grade machinery disturbing the peace, like I'd dropped napalm instead of gently parking in my own driveway. But here's where things backfired. My helicopter landing had gone viral. Someone, probably one of the teens with the phone, had posted the whole event to TikTok captioned, When HOA Karen bans your Jeep, so you land a helicopter instead. Within days, it had racked up millions of views. Comments poured in calling me a legend, a patriot, a Top Gun HOA Avenger. Memes were made. People started calling my neighborhood Landing Zone Karen. Even local news picked it up. One anchor said with a chuckle, Guess this neighborhood. Learned that when you mess with a Jeep guy, he brings the big toys. When the HOA held the emergency vote to push Karen's amendment through, it wasn't even close. 18-2. Denied. Turns out a whole lot of neighbors had started getting real tired of Karen's reign of clipboard terror. Her nonsense about wind chimes, porch flags, and flower pot alignment had been simmering under the surface for years. The helicopter stunt? It was just the spark. And me? I wasn't the villain. I was the guy who finally stood up to her. The fallout came fast. At the next monthly meeting, members demanded a vote of no confidence. Karen tried to rally her loyalists. What? Few she had left, but it didn't matter. The motion passed. Unanimously, she was out. The new HOA president, a younger guy named Mike who wore jeans to meetings and didn't own a single clipboard, stopped by my place a few days later. He shook my hand and said, "Look, man, on behalf of everyone, thank you, that was epic. Also, sorry for the Jeep thing, we're gonna fix that too." I nodded. Appreciated. "And hey, if anyone ever needs airlifted to a barbecue, you know who to call." Mike laughed and promised to make helicopter landings an honorary exception. Karen, meanwhile, couldn't take the humiliation. She tried to hold her head high for about a week, but the sideways glances, the whispers, the constant laughter from passing teens quoting, "That's how you park," finally broke her. 2 weeks later, a big fat for sale sign appeared in her yard. And just like that, Karen was gone. Her legacy? A shattered clipboard, a failed amendment, and a TikTok with more likes than her entire HOA newsletter subscriber list. As for me, I still drive my Jeep, and the helicopter, let's just say I keep it fueled up. You never know when another Karen might need a little reminder from above. Life in the neighborhood returned to a strange, peaceful normal after Karen's dramatic exit. The lawns were still pristine, the flower pots still arranged with borderline, military precision. But there was a shift in the air, a subtle change. The feeling of quiet rebellion lingered. I still drove my Jeep every day, as I had before all this madness began. No more threats from Karen, no more whispers of aesthetic violations. My driveway was mine again, and I parked my Jeep with pride. No one dared complain, and if they did, the mere mention of helicopter sent them scurrying back to their perfect lawns. As for the helicopter, well, it didn't just collect dust. Once a month or so, I'd fire it up, usually for maintenance, but occasionally just for fun. It wasn't about showing off anymore. It was about making sure Karen's legacy didn't go unnoticed. And honestly, it always got a good reaction. A few times I'd even let neighbors know when I was taking it for a spin, just for kicks. They'd wave, some of the kids still asking if they could take a ride. It was like I had become the neighborhood legend, the guy who took on the HOA and won. Sometimes I'd think back on the whole ordeal, the petty tyrants, the ridiculous fines, and Karen's insane obsession with aesthetic purity. The real kicker, though, was how easy it was to get the last laugh. The moral of the story? Sometimes the best way to deal with petty tyrants is to go over their heads, literally. I wasn't some helpless victim of a glorified lawn cop. I was a guy with options. And when life gives you a Karen, well, you just make sure she's never in charge of your driveway again. And that's how I ended up with a helicopter, a victorious smile, and a little more space in my neighborhood than most people would ever know. Next time someone tells you that you don't belong, just remember, you've always got another way to land.